Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of the Spheres Anarchive Lab #1, one of many, but everybody could be here. Yeah, what a lovely group we have. So yesterday, we're doing kind of the same slot types every day, which is the morning is like kind of discussion, and the afternoon is anarchiving session, kind of circus floor work, anarchiving practice in the online group. And then kind of changing how those sessions run each day, but that's the basic format. So we'll do the same tomorrow for our final day. Yeah. So let's see my notes here. So and yesterday, Jay interviewed me, and it was super fun. And now we're gonna return the favor and get even more good stuff, because I'm gonna get to interview him. And really put the screws to him, which is great, because I know that's what everyone's been waiting for, is to really ask the hard questions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but I thought I'd just say, for the benefit of kind of priming things, just a little run through like kind of the litany of the Russian nesting dolls of what we kind of have going on here a little bit. That this is we're gathering as part of the Sphere project that was started by Sarah de Wilder and Ole Strandberg as part of Celerante de Wilder, or a radar-styled novel, and kind of working out of a grant that was crafted with them and Erik and Erik Bordelot and others for a 3-year project with Creative Europe. And we are beyond that, not beyond that in time, but we're bigger than that grant, obviously. But that's a little bit of what occasions some of our coming together and our concretization. And it can be worth just to say that 3-year project of the Sphere, and the Sphere generally, is about discovering new ecologies for funding in the performing arts. Looking at technologies and technical systems, but also how to reimagine the economy of the arts, and also to see what the performing arts as creative knowledge finding disciplines already know, and have perhaps been prevented from sharing with more systemic design moments, because they're considered by various parts of technical fields to not be technical. But of course, those of us in performing arts know otherwise. So the Sphere kind of has a number of things that it wants to kind of try to do to get to those new ecologies for funding in the performing arts. And the Anarchive is one of them. Crypto-economics is another, and developing different modes for accounting or founding communities, our creative communities, artistic communities, communities of artists, audience, venues, everyone who's kind of involved. And in general, kind of an ecological view on the scene of performing arts, right? Because there is obviously more than just the artists in a cultural scene of art. There's more than just the audience. There's more than just the venue. They're all interconnected. And the Anarchive is a way to kind of get into that a little bit. So I thought that I would just share my screen, and yes. You can see it, yes?
Yeah.
Oh, these are all our, I don't want to give away that we made so many fragments yesterday. Sorry for the, I just, so much good shit. I'm excited to go through it. Oh, what did I do with the,
Oh no. Oh no.
what's the matter?
We see everything.
Oh, you see everything. There we go. Okay, so I just want to show you guys a bit about this year. This is year 1 in the Sphere. And on March 30th, we had the Money Lab, which is a yearly event of kind of activists and thinkers around theories of alternative theories of money, started by Geert Lovink at the Institute for Network Cultures, and so the Sphere presented there, and we had a wonderful time. And we've been kind of working off of this kind of loose map for year one, right? Which is, and I made this diagram where you see the Money Lab, you see the Anarchive Lab, which is where we are in this kind of non-red balloon. And then you've got the Crypto Economics Lab, which is happening in a few weeks. And then the Accounting Otherwise Lab happening a few weeks after that. And then we have the Berlin Circus Festival. And the idea kind of being like, and I'm very interested in these kind of, you could say gamification, or setting kind of a rhythm or a fabulation into the future about kind of collective work where we're, you know, we have this speculation about what we're going to do in these things. And we talked about that in the Money Lab, and we want to kind of connect our labs and what we're doing, and then share something of that at the Berlin Circus Festival. So I just wanted to show you that. Yeah. So then that leads us down the nestings all back to here, to the Anarchive Lab, where we're looking at, you know, where does a performance go, you know, in a future where we can, you know, have a better idea of where a performance can go, and where we can go with it, right? And this is where some of the economic or social financial aspect come in, right? Where it's not just predetermined where a performance can go, but rather we can have a hand collectively in following these trails and seeing where they lead. So that's just my little thing to share to prime the space, and excited to talk with Jay Gilligan today, who's been a partner with the Sphere for a while now. Amazing creative thinker and amazing artist, and him and I have kind of co-created this lab, or some of its conditions, and it's come out of many conversations that had an amazing time with. So I wanted to ask you, Jay, to kind of to start out, like there was a reason why you connected with some of these ideas of the Sphere, of the Anarchive, of where does a performance go, of kind of a new way of organizing in circus specifically, which is what we're focused on. Like you already kind of had some practices and some inspiration, some curiosities, maybe some obsessions, you tell me, that kind of brought you to kind of be like, yep, I'm interested in jamming with that. Could you say a little bit about what some of that was beforehand?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a large part of the focus of my work is on process and understanding the creative process and having a process that's alive. And so when we first started talking about this Anarchive, of course, it also points to the archive itself, and just all of the related areas around archiving, specifically in terms of circus culture. So I'm really also fascinated by the culture of circus and of the juggling community. And so a lot of my thoughts were in those areas. And I can start really simply and kind of get to the more developed, the more extreme ideas. But so from a really basic standpoint, again, in relationship to circus culture, we have this idea of documenting a work, and even on the most basic level is, okay, I'm going to film my performance. And I remember when YouTube came out, there was this big controversy. Should I put my show on YouTube or not, or my act on YouTube? Because if I put my full act, I'm giving it away. And there's a value there, an economic value, right? That I'm giving up control. And there's also the implication that if I put my act or my show on YouTube, somebody can quote unquote steal it, and then they will reap the financial benefits of that work. And it was such a really funny paradox, because on one hand, as an artist, we have not obligation, but we have the desire perhaps to share our work. And if I stick in terms of the market, I mean, I need to publicize myself, or nobody will know about my show in the first place to give me money for it. But in publicizing my show, people are going to steal it. And it's, so there was this really weird, that's where, okay, I'm going to put the trailer up on YouTube, but only the full show on my website, or there's a password to protect it or something like this. It was this really weird tension between, I want to hype my work, but I don't want anybody to see the work, to the point where, a lot of people just refused to put their work online. And then of course you get there's a zeitgeist in our world, and somebody else would publish their work and it would be very similar to somebody else's work who hadn't published. And then there's a whole controversy there of, hey, I made that before you, or I should get more energy than you for that thing. But well, this other person published it. So what are you going to do? I mean, so there's all these kind of, in one way, just to say personally, kind of boring, like mundane, practical problems around this documentation stuff. But that was the first thing that came to mind, is there is a culture of ownership and authorship, and there's a culture of, financial, benefits and everything else tied to documenting your work in whatever way. And so the first place I started was when I got asked to be involved in the project with you, is I started to investigate or collect different various methods of documenting, not anarchiving, maybe more archiving, but that I found were maybe unique or fun to share, that really sparked my process. And I think if it's okay, I'm gonna go through a few of those, because I think they're
I was just gonna ask. Yeah, I was just gonna ask. Like, please tell me more.
Stream of consciousness, as you know, Joel, that I like to do sometimes, is just free associate whatever. But this is a little bit of a jam in terms of archiving on any sort of level. So here's just a bunch of random thoughts that kind of build up to a finale. But here we go. So recently there was a one-man show by Delgaudio in New York City called In and of Itself. It's a magic show, but don't tell him that, he'll be offended. And it was directed by Frank Oz. But the cool thing of the show was that he did an amazing, it was so fun how he played with the format of a live performance. And every night in the show, he would ask one audience member to leave halfway through the show and come back to the performance the next night. But he would give the audience member a big book, a really big, thick book, to go home that night and imagine what the end of the show would be if they would have seen it, and write it in the book. And then the next day in the show, he would say, okay, so is the person who was here last night, can you please stand up? And he did this show for 3 years. He first started in San Francisco, and then he did off-Broadway run in New York City for a couple years. And every night the person did come back and they did bring the book. And at that point of the show, they would read what they were imagining the show to be. So a couple of fun stories from that is, number one, when he moved the theater, his performance from San Francisco to New York City to go off-Broadway, the book moved too. So when he was in San Francisco, he said, hey, I'm going to be opening in New York next week. Is anybody here by chance going to be in New York City next week? And somebody was. So they traveled with the book across the country for him. And the thing is, the show played for so long, there's actually 3 volumes of the book. And the book is thick and big and chunky. And that is something I'm super interested in, which you'll see later. I'm going to come back to this, but this idea of an object, a physical object being an anarchive that passes into the future of a performance. So physical tools, physical things that you can touch and hold from a performance. So not an archive just as a digital, anarchive as a digital trace, but actual physical concrete traces, and how can those be passed forward? And that's why I thought it was so genius, this idea from him of Derek Delgadio's show, to have this book that was, again, anarchiving, because the person's at home, they don't see the end of the show, but they imagine what it could be from what they saw. And it was just an amazingly powerful experience to have that iteration as well, night after night, and you're building this book.
Yeah.
And so
and that just says something too about the digital and analog as being kind of like fictive boundaries, and that our practices bring us in and out of those, like even yesterday, Gabrielle, who will probably be here later, he was like, well, I do most of the stuff in handwriting. So he was invisibly, just like the person went home. Gabriel was not writing into the doc that people could say, he was handwriting. And later on, this other kind of media, this like touched, paper media made its way on through like a photo, but it's not only the digital at all.
Right.
Yeah. So what did that do for you to this object?
Like people are, there's a big black market for those books, by the way. They're trying to buy the three volumes as an art.
Is that what you were buying just before we started?
I would love to own one of those books. I think it would be a real rare, nice thing to have, to be inspired by. But so yeah, the physical objects I think was a fun thing to think about being passed on into the future. And then there's a lot more just basic notation, because, for example, as a juggler, we do struggle with the idea of notation. I mean, once you give something a name, you can talk about it. It's what Rolf said, right? On Good Point. Once something has a name, you can talk about it. So in juggling, it is an act in time, right? It stops when I stop, and that's the beauty of it. That's one of the things I love about juggling, is that it happens in time, and when I stop, it also stops. So this idea of passing on information to the future, like the invention of writing, I mean, obviously was a very useful thing. So in juggling, how do we document juggling and share information about physical acts that happen in time, if it's not by video? And also video, again, we're talking about anarchiving here, and video sometimes also is not the best medium to transmit juggling information to each other. Well, we won't dive into that right now, but take my word for it. So, so there have been attempts to make juggling notation systems. The most popular one is site swap. We may or may not get into site swap this afternoon. I don't find it so interesting to talk about now, but just to say there is a notation system, mathematically based, by which we can share juggling patterns by writing down numbers notation. But also that notation is very limited. We still don't have a full notation for juggling, which describes or encodes every single piece of information about a moment of juggling. Mostly we talk about the objects in a notation, and we don't talk about the body. Or if we're lucky, we can talk about the body, but not also the objects. At some point, the notation breaks down and just becomes language, like written, right? And for me, the point of a notation system is not to encode information with just a arbitrary system of symbols and like learning a second language. I don't care about necessarily transmitting the juggling to someone else. For me, the usefulness of notation and juggling in my life has been, for me, notation condenses information into smaller, understandable, placeholders, like symbols. Okay, this little symbol encompasses this huge concept, and this other little symbol encompasses another huge concept. And if I encode them into these symbols, I can put both those symbols in my brain at the same time next to each other and understand all the concepts together, how they relate, and make new connections between huge amounts of information. Whereas if I didn't encode them into this little symbol, I would just occupy my entire brain space trying to always have the words to speak to myself about that whole huge complicated issue, right? So this idea of juggling notation, for me, it's really interesting in the way of connecting larger concepts together in my brain, to find new concepts rather than just to document the concepts that are already there and to communicate them to someone else as they are. It's a way to kind of expand the notation allows.
A way to, what I hear you saying is kind of that putting things in notation or in score is also a way of freeing up brain space to pursue other things. If you know that those things, if you know that those symbols trigger certain packets of information, let's say, well, right? And then, is that right? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, quite basically, on a really stupid fundamental level, if I don't give all this huge concept of information a little symbol, every time I think about that concept in my brain, I have to go through the entire concept in my brain because I have no other way to talk about it, right? Yeah. So every time I want to refer to this one concept in juggling, body zone, throw, blah, blah, blah thing, if I don't really give it a nice little succinct name or symbol or code, I just can't escape not talking through the entire thing every time. And by the time you've talked through the whole concept in your brain, you're either out of inspiration or out of time, or you can't hold anything else in your brain because you can't escape saying those words. So it's kind of a funny situation. Well,
and it's especially beneficial when that's something that you've really worked through. So there's something almost like in the cryptographic hash, like in cryptoeconomics, right? It's something that makes trustable a certain packet, and it's opaque to perhaps others. It's encrypted, like not it wouldn't mean the same thing if other people saw your symbols, and they're like, oh, let me go and do that. And well, is that partially because it's encrypted, it's enclosed, and this also brings in the Anarchive. Also, when you said this too, also that it can't capture everything either.
Yeah, I mean, I think the utopian dream of a lot of people is that it is not opaque, that it is kind of universally, used as a communication that everybody can access. But that hasn't happened yet, just to say, with juggling, and probably with lots of other things, right? But I just wanted to give a couple of quick examples of attempts at that, as a little list, because I think they're fun. So there's Laban notation for dancers, which is you can Google Laban notation, but basically you start from the center of the body and work your way outwards to the limbs in terms of this kind of graphical. It's a slightly graphical, score notation for Laban for dance movements. There have been extensions for juggling made in Laban notation, which are kind of funny. So you start in Laban notation from the center of the body and work your way literally outwards on the paper towards the limbs. And then juggling goes like, I get in the camera, farther out on the piece of paper to that, like the hands and the objects in terms of patterns. So that's kind of a fun idea that we can build upon existing notation. But again, not too many people are literate in Laban notation, and especially like 0 people are literate in Laban juggling notation. So it's not maybe so useful. Second thing is there's a lot of attempts to equate juggling to music, because music has a rich notation system. Well, depending on who you talk to, but we have the staff with the notes and the
sure.
and everything. So there's been a couple of attempts to kind of map juggling technique into some sort of code which will function as music notation works. And I just have a really fun, for me, one of the most inspirational examples of this, which still blows my mind. So in the 1970s, there was a group of jugglers called the Flying Karamazov Brothers, and they were from America. And they were actually musicians before they started to juggle. So they were quite accomplished musicians. And then they said, okay, well, we're going to learn to juggle. They got interested in it just randomly. And they said, we want to make a show. And being musicians and being kind of on their own without any external references, they said, oh, well, the way I play a song is, I sit down on a piece of paper and I write out the notes, right? I get inspired. Maybe I have the piano in front of me to tinkle out the tune, but you literally compose, in that musical way of like writing notes on a staff. So so the first thing they did, instead of going out to juggle and throw things in the air physically, they sat down with a piece of paper and they made a system in their head to equate juggling throws to musical notes. And they literally composed an 1-hour-long juggling show, 1-hour-long show on paper. And because they had, they were still practicing, we could call the scales of juggling. So they had technique inside of them. They weren't not juggling. They just weren't doing these throws in this order for this show. They ran through the entire show first time through with no rehearsal. It worked. Like the way a musician would learn a piece of Bach, right? And then play something. And I've never heard of anything like that before or after in my life in the juggling world. That's completely insane.
So they performed it. Did anybody else perform their score?
They performed. Yeah, they themselves performed it as their first show.
Did anybody else perform their score?
No, not that I know of. So I actually invited them to come to Stockholm in 2009. We did a music and juggling course at the university, and I invited them to come and share their work. And Patrick, you were there. Yeah. And their style of juggling is really wild. Like, it's not straightforward. It's very personal. It's very idiosyncratic. It's very eclectic. It's not you could say normal, if there is a normal juggling technique. And so we tried to learn some of their pieces. We eventually did learn a couple of their pieces, but it was not straightforward. It was absolutely not accessible language in terms of even physical technique. So it was a pretty bizarre But I love that story. It still, I get really passionate.
Amazing.
Like that I would write down an entire show of circus before I even physically did it, that, and then that you could just do it without any trouble, that your notation system, at least internally, worked so well that that they could pull it off. It's insane.
Well, and let me ask you, because it also seems to me to be almost equal proof of the need for a more general Anarchive, where we're working with partials, because like you said, it's so personal, and all of our techniques, we share practices, but our techniques are so personal, even beyond ourselves. They are unique the way they come through us, just like the fragments of how we render expressions of experience are unique. And so that, it seems like a great story for that as well.
Yeah, what I love about the Flying Karamazov story is it's like the anarchiving starts for, like, the anarchiving is the first step almost. And of course now in my practice, in my life, in my process, documentation, archiving, anarchiving always kind of happens after the fact. And here this week, we're definitely trying to pull it in during the fact. But it's kind of funny, the Flying Karamazov brothers almost did it before the fact to create these anarchive, moments before they even started the work. I thought was pretty awesome as an inspirational idea. And then, so building on from that, like the next idea to throw it out was that there are all these performance companies who do franchise their work. They do iterate their work, just for, like, Blue Man Group is a performance group called Blue Man Group, or Stomp, or Cirque Du Soleil, or so Cirque du Soleil, they don't really franchise their work in the way of making, just copies of the same show. But Cirque du Soleil, Blue Man Group, Stomp, they at least have a very long, like their shows last a really long time, like generationally. I mean, Mystère and Cirque du Soleil's show Mystère in Las Vegas has been going for 27 years. So we're talking generationally. How do we pass down this work from one generation to the other? I mean, this is like such a crazy thing to even be talking about for me personally, to think that you have a circus performance that lasts so long that you have to even be worried about, like, the cast is going to get old and retire. I mean, it's
right.
bizarre.
It's like EastEnders or something like that.
It's kind of like a bizarre new, a new trend in circus that when I was growing up, that's just bizarre, And so anyway, the point is that these companies, Blue Man Group, for example, or Stomp, they have what's called the company Bible. And it's this Bible is this big, thick book about the work, which every new company member has to read. And it's all of the rituals and the encoding of the DNA of the company and of the show that exists. And I tried, Joel, I told you about this Bible like months ago, right? I tried so hard to get to pull my connections to get like a page from one of these Bibles. I couldn't pull it off. They're obviously like super, super well guarded, inside the company. They're really seen as like this very valuable source of information, like financially valuable. Like, it is the secret of the show for these multi-million-dollar companies, like these multi-million-dollar, shows. So yeah.
Can I ask a few questions about that?
What's that?
I want to ask a few questions about that, like just almost like almost anthropological questions. So do you know if it is only in a physical format?
So as far as so the way I heard about these Bibles are from, like, friends who are in the company, and they were physical books. And I'm sure Soleil and whatever, they've gone to some online kind of, databases.
Encrypted thing, yeah.
But as far as I know, they're like literally physical books. I mean, they're like literally guarded, like locked in a safe, because they're so paranoid someone's going to steal the Bible and then be able to know what's the DNA of the Blue Man Group, show or whatever.
So second question, do you know who or what role maintains or updates the Bible?
Good question. So in many cases, I mean, now I'm speculating, just to say.
Yeah.
But I have a vibe of the answer. First of all, there's the artistic director of the show, the current artistic director of a show. And what's really interesting about this is there's a tension there, because the tension is there's a current artistic director of the show who's not the director of the show. But that current artistic director, they need to earn their paycheck. They can't just, like, they got to put their stamp on it to justify that they are needed and valid in the moment, right? To get their salary every month. Or otherwise the company could just kind of wake up one day and go like, oh, Joel, he's just keeping the exact same thing that's in the book. So do we
I don't know why you're using me as an example, but
yeah. So I mean, so then there's the tension between the artistic director is hired to uphold the original vision of the show, but at the same time, the artistic director has to uphold their place in the company. And then you get some really weird mutations over 27 years of Mystère. And I saw the premiere of Mystère, and I saw Mystère right before it closed before the pandemic. And I've seen Mystère over 76 times in my life. And so I've seen it go through iterations where it's like the current artistic director, you can tell they're making their stamp and they're changing it, and then it snaps back in a few years to that original vision of the book because they get a new director who wants to, you know, uphold the integrity. It's just a weird, bizarre artistic roller coaster between this financial, there's like a financial component, like keeping your job, and also then the artistic. And also just to say, there's another part of it too, which is these companies make Bibles, I'm guessing, but in part definitely because they think the show as it is like that's the money maker. Like the show with this act and this way, with this character saying this line, that's what's making them money. And they don't want to tear apart their show for fear of killing the golden goose. And that's why they have this Bible, which is like, you stick to this script and you're going to make the money. And if you dare tamper with it, we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, there's so much of that in Las Vegas and in show business, or in my world in general, like circus shows, where people don't have a clear understanding of, I mean, including me, I'm not above this at all, but we don't have a clear understanding exactly of what is the effectiveness of the work, in what mechanical, physical way of this part versus this, or the rhythm or the soundtrack. And if you replace a cast member, I mean, Cirque du Soleil, you have to replace cast members by physical qualities, which is messed up. So if you're not, you know, 5'11", brown hair, blue eye, whatever is that general, you know, original role that whoever made, or whatever gender or whatever musculature or whatever, you're not even considered for the role. And it's not because they would necessarily need somebody who looked like that. It's just that's who the original person was, and the show's a hit. So then how, you know, you tamper with the you're tampering with potentially losing all that money and whatever, which is just ridiculous. For me, it's completely ridiculous. That's such a wrong look at art or creation. Right?
Well, and I want to point out something that's really powerful in that example as well, that you intimated at, and that's that the archive, or the Bible, you know, if we could archive and its hard edges, you know, and the Bible, they have, you could use them interchangeably in that sense. Like the archive is supposed to have that kind of authority as an idea, so you call it a Bible, and that the archive is always tied to authority, like you said, you know, like there's an artistic director that, and always tied to the politics of power in an organization.
Right.
Always, right? That,
yeah.
And like who controls that archive, and that's a reason for the Anarchive. And that's also a reason for a more distributed approach to ownership, and to also to a more distributed collective approach to creation, to produce different dynamics that don't loop based on this on a power dynamic, which doesn't have too much to do with the, like you said, doesn't have too much to do with the creativity of the show. In fact, it can inhibit it.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about for the Anarchive is then it's just a more honest understanding of what's actually happening, again, of the creative process and what's valuable in the work artistically, which is in the end what is driving the financial, you know, I mean, in a large part, right? Like, so it's not a trivial theoretical thing, and it's concrete. Well, I just had two more little examples that I think are super fun, and then I'll throw me something else. But like talking about Cirque du Soleil, as I love to, as Erik knows, I'm completely obsessed. So when we're talking about archiving or anarchiving or documenting, Cirque du Soleil with the show Toruk, for example, and they did this on a couple other shows, but with Toruk, they took AI cameras and they pointed them at the faces of the audience members during the show. And they would record the audience reactions on their faces for each scene of each minute of the show. And if there was, and then they applied some sort of, standard to analyzing it, where it was like, well, if we went 3 minutes without a certain smile or shock or, like reaction on the faces, we got to they tweaked the show according to this AI camera stuff that they were analyzing faces of the audience. And by the way, that was also unknown to the audience, whether that is ethical or whatever or not. Just to say, I think that's also an interesting part of the story. So you're watching Toruk, you paid your ticket price. You already paid money to be there, but you're also being exploited. Your own, involuntary emotional reactions to the show are shaping each iteration of the show. I thought that was like super futuristic and extreme in the dystopian way. I mean, also, we don't have to dive into that. I think it's like just a funny, crazy example about anarchiving, because we do talk about, and the anarchive can be about emotion and these kind of intangible things. And Soleil was just like, yeah, well, let's throw some money at some AI cameras and get in there for real. Come on, like, let's do it. So that was pretty 1984 of them. But then the last example that was kind of really fun to share with you, because I think it's one of the most profound things I found, and it's also about juggling. So of course I love it the most. But so there's a juggler called Michael Motion, and he created juggling as art, like juggling. He invented or created or discovered or whatever juggling as an art form. Like, and we don't need to dive into that today, but that was about 40 years ago. So that's pretty insane. But Michael has a crazy process, and he said one thing to me I'm never going to forget. He said that because he was David Bowie's hands in the movie Labyrinth with the crystal ball, where he waves a crystal ball in his hand, and he called it dynamic manipulation. But since then, it's been appropriated by other people, and now it's commonly known as contact juggling. And so Michael said, well, and that really traumatized Michael, that everybody in the world, in his mind, stole his work and stole his technique and stole his kind of identity, visual identity. Also because that piece with the crystal ball, the way he came up with it, again, we don't have so much time today, but it was about his sister who was dying of cancer. So you can also imagine that he made this very personal creation, and now he sees everybody in every park he walks through, every street corner with a crystal ball. I mean, you can imagine personally that maybe it's a little bit hard for him to deal with. But anyway, I mean, well, not anyway, but that's relevant because, I mean, he has a direct relationship to derivatives of work and iterations and kind of ownership and consent and process. But he told me, he said, people can steal all my work they want, but they will never steal my process. My process is personal, and they can never take that away from me. And that really stuck in my head my whole life. I always think about that all these things, again, looping back to the beginning of this whole rant, I'm saying is like, oh, should I put my act on YouTube or not? Someone will steal my act or whatever. Well, maybe you can steal my act, but you can't steal my process. And I think that's super powerful. And I think also, Joel, last night, late night on the phone, my time, we were talking about documenting anarchiving process. And hopefully this afternoon, we open up the process more for you guys as well on your end, right? And so anyway, so this idea about process and anarchiving process. But the cool story about Michael Motion is this: Michael Motion's process, one of parts of his process, which is just so cool. Michael Motion's process is he lives in a house that has 2 floors. So who cares about that? So why? So he has a staircase to go to the 2nd floor. And anytime he wants to use a new object, a new shape, a new prop to juggle, he'll put it in the middle of the stairs, right in the middle of the stairs. And he'll leave it there for 1 year. And every day in his life, whenever he wants to go from the 1st floor to the 2nd floor, from the bedroom to the kitchen, he has to climb over that stupid prop that's in his way every day for a year, twice a day, 3 times a day. Every day he has to, it enters his consciousness every 5 times a day before he even touches it. And then after a year, when he's ready to start, he bends down and picks up the thing off the stairs, and he knows where he wants to start with it. So he doesn't just start, he doesn't just assume to walk into a studio with a new prop and start to just play with it. He really thinks about it for a year. I mean, this guy's extreme. I mean, Michael Motion is the He's the godfather of artistic.
Yeah, yeah.
And that, you know, I just love that idea about having a process that is so intertwined with your life and so respectful of the object and so caring for what he does for his work and so ambitious as well. Like I would not have the patience, you know, to do that. Obviously, few people would, or the tenacity to stick with it. So those are just some thoughts, you know, related thoughts, a little flow about process and anarchiving and
Yeah.
stuff that people have been doing
No.
that caught my attention.
Yeah, man, it's amazing. No, and I love how the examples that you chose for me really loop in so much of the kind of co-learning we've been doing in the Anarchive, you and me. You know, like I love the way that you're kind of always in the same way that, you know, in a juggling pattern, when you can add, you go from 2 to 3 balls or 4 balls, you know, you add a ball, and that's itself kind of a mini trick within the trick, you know, is the incorporation. And that's just as a side note, something I enjoy about thinking with you is I feel like there's a nice infeed of like, oh, here's a, and now we're just wrapping that in, you know, just, and similar to going back and up the stairs, you know, and you know, I think about the relation of that last story to anarchiving, you know, where you know, the constraints or the things that we put in front of us to anarchive, you know, we want to get away. The archive wants to watch a video of a performance and then represent it for a clear future use, and everything's clear and you're clarifying everything. And the anarchive doesn't want to do this, and Michael on the stairs doesn't want to do that either. He wants to set up an object for contemplation, doesn't want to start by thinking that he knows what it's for or what it can do.
Yeah.
You know, there's a wonderful phrase that comes out of like the process philosophy. You know, we don't yet know what a body can do. You know, and we'll extend it to crypto-economics to say we don't yet know what a token can do, right? And in general, it's a great question as a way to get past the maybe whatever the current trend is of hyper focusing on something to think this as an object. Now let's use it. We've already decided what it is.
Right.
A lot of anarchiving is saying let's not assume that we know what something is, you know, and let's instead move into a time of contemplation of, like I would say in that amazing last story, that the prop on the stairs is an anarchival fragment for him. Yeah. You know, where he's not yet assuming that he knows what it is. Like, so there's a number of things in the stuff that you said that I want to kind of bounce off of. But what do you bounce off of there?
Yeah, I should just tie up the so now that we have that context kind of for those comments, I should just tie up again the back to your original question, which was how am I personally connected to these things? And it's because I made a show, and going back to that book from Dogadio. So I made this show called How to Welcome the Aliens with Erik from France for company CEREO. And in that show, we had this idea of we're going to juggle to welcome aliens to Earth. And then we thought, okay, are we going to take this theme theatrically? Is it a comedy show? Is it just a bizarre instigation as a theatrical framework so that it validates us being weird or something? And we decided to take the show seriously. I mean, to take the theme seriously of welcoming aliens to Earth and what would that actually mean? And that got us much farther artistically. But in the end, what it meant was, since we tried to take it as seriously as possible, or as real as possible, I mean, well, I don't think there's going to be aliens at the show. Probably, like in my lifetime, in my experience, there's probably not going to be aliens there. So, and I also thought, well, nobody really wants to see a rehearsal. Wouldn't you rather see, like, hey, do you want to go see this show tonight? They're going to rehearse in case aliens come to Earth. Oh, it's kind of funny. But like, wouldn't you rather say, hey, come, let's see the show tonight where they're going to welcome aliens to Earth? Like, that's more strong and like, you know. And so we said, no, let's not do a rehearsal. Let's do it for real. How can we do it for real? And then it becomes this thing of the Voyager spacecraft with the golden record, which is a time capsule in the end. I mean, really, the golden record on the Voyager spacecraft is a time capsule, is what it is. And so we said, oh, we should make a time capsule of our show. And in that way, aliens aren't at the show now, most likely, or as far as we know. But if we bury a time capsule, there's the potential that aliens could uncover it in the future. And of course, the aliens could be us and blah, 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 like in the, in the future of humanity. But this idea of then making a time capsule from a show where it didn't just document, we didn't want to document what had happened. We wanted them to be able to find the time capsule and make the show would happen when they open the time capsule. So the show would happen again. And so there's, again, this physical trace of a show that isn't just endeavoring to record what happened, but it endeavors to encode that show happens again in the future when the time capsules open. And the one point I want to make about all of it, which I find as an artist, the most valuable thing that happened was in trying to make this time capsule, the anarchiving, the archiving, the documenting actually created the material, like some of the material that went into the time capsule. It was a feedback loop. It really fed back into us making work that really lent itself to that concept. So I'll give a really concrete example. How do you put juggling inside of a time capsule? Again, like physically, how do you put physical juggling inside of a time capsule? So one really fun way was to tie a string on each ball. And as you juggle the balls in different patterns, of course, the strings wind up and intertwine and they make a braid. It's a braid notation. And then you can physically snip that chunk of thread that's woven and put it in the time capsule. It's very easy to, okay, I mean, I get it. This is all artistic, this is totally far out.
Oh, no, it's not.
In theory, you could unwind the string and trace the path of that ball. We had a lot of imagination into that area that really gave real world results in the work that were artistic payoffs. It wasn't just academic. And that's what I was talking to you last night, Joel, about my practice and my work is that I love it when the idea comes out through the work and not just through the framework or the thought process, but you actually see it concretely on stage. So when you juggle the balls with the string on it, I think it looks really beautiful and fun and bizarre, and it's a nice fantasy, and it's very, it's alive. It's an image that has a real truth to it. It has a real content to it. And so in that How to Welcome the Alien show, through making this time capsule, it actually also, it gave more to the show than it took away, than just being another extra layer, right? It actually grew in a concrete way, not in just a thought process or like a fantasy, but in a real concrete physical way of inventing new juggling techniques, which was just amazing to have this concept that actually gave birth to actual juggling and not just a recording of the juggling that was already there, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and I think that, again, so much wonderful stuff to unpack there. Like, I didn't know about the string thing, and I would just want to make a strong point there, and even for everyone about like that is the Anarchive right there. You know what I mean? It could be the archive if you're like, let's put that in a museum so we can appreciate that Jay Gilligan and his creative partner at the time made this work. But it's much more powerful as like a mark of a real thing that happened that asks you to do something with it. And that's part of what the Anarchive is that it's future facing, right? And that's why we connect it with the proposition, the desire, the determination to facilitate together new economies through the Anarchive, because they're future facing. They look to put what we've made to future use, and we're going to figure out we have to figure out what that means collaboratively, what that means in terms of our creative rights and all that thing. But we know that we want to not lose what was in the past. We know that we want to outfit our work for time travel, basically. And I love that in your work, that's what you like literally did. And I think that something beautiful about a time capsule and about the Voyager time capsule is that they were never meant to be technical specifications. They were rather things that gave a vibe, a feel for what was and for what the relation could be, right? It reached out, and so something like the string there, that's not going to be used for someone to be able to imitate exactly what you did.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
But if they made something,
it's a proposal
yeah,
to,
but
yeah.
yeah, it's a proposal. It's a concrete proposal to imagine, in
Yeah.
which something that was created after that tangled ball of yarn would be different than something that they made without it, right? And that's super super powerful. There's I want to get into oh yeah, and I wanted to mention a reference to Erin Manning, one of the founders of the Sense Lab in Montreal, which in relation to the time capsule, she has a new book called For a Pragmatics of the Useless, and that's another way to see the Anarchive, where um, it's also that you're dealing with things and creating things that may appear useless now, you know, especially to a very a certain kind of view of utilitarian view. But you can also understand following the feelings of something and the fragmentary partialness of something, because you don't yet know what use it will find, right? And so that's what her book is about. Like the pragmatics of the useless is that just because something doesn't seem like it fits or makes anything right now doesn't mean it won't in the future. So I really wanted to get into, you mentioned it a little bit, I wanted to get into this thing about the technique that shows you the creative path and not a predetermined thing. Like yesterday, you and Emil and Patrick were doing incredible kind of iterative games together and moving through some different parts and sharing with us some of the like that movement through, like, oh, does this work, does that work? And there was a moment where Patrick was using the baton, and you had kind of given him like the restriction, like, oh, move it just around a small part of your body, and so he was moving it around his neck, his shoulder, right, and other parts as well. There was a certain moment where he bounced it up from his kind of neck to his shoulder, and it had like a rhythm, and he kind of turned after it, right, as the baton went. And I remember that we heard like and I was like, whoa, there's something happening there. Um, and then we heard you say, you were like, oh yeah, of course, yeah, the follow the technique to when it wants the turning, right? Because you were trying to make a 3D
Yeah.
scape for juggling, which is something that you're interested in as an artistic researcher. And so you were kind of like, oh yeah, don't just put on a 3D map of something, you know, like the archive, like this is what it is. Instead, you were like, no, the tech. And then you said something about how the technique is going to lead me to the creation mode, you know. And so I just wanted to just hear you just riff a little bit on like, on what does that mean for in that moment, if we can use it as a real specific moment. It was incredible for me, because I already was like tracking it, and then you were like, shh, you know, there was something creating there that had to do with Patrick. He followed the baton, and he followed with his shoulder, and that made the turning, which then carved out the three-dimensional space.
Exactly.
So I
Yeah.
don't know how do you want to jump into it, but I just want to hear you just riff
Yeah.
wildly on that, what you said there, that technique created it was the creation mode there.
Yeah. Yeah, I can say some words about that. So again, that kind of goes back to what I personally, just for my taste, like to see in the work, is that the concept comes from the expression of the technique itself, and not from another, maybe a theatrical layer or some sort of external concept. But like we can have a desire or an impulse to create a certain, or to work with a certain concept, but that concept comes out from the actual technique or work itself or movements, and it's not just again, like kind of a thought experiment, but it really exists in the real world, that you can touch it or point to it. And so what was happening yesterday, what you're talking about in that moment, was we were actually trying to make this thing. We were trying to uncover this new style of juggling, which I've seen a couple times from the guy Erik, who I made the How to Welcome the Aliens with. And we were trying, yeah, it really failed, but we tried yesterday. Like we could not uncover it. So I said, okay, let's try to break down the qualities of what we're trying to shoot for. And one of the qualities that popped out to me was, let's take juggling technique, and instead of making it 2-dimensional, let's make it 3-dimensional. And well, that meant something really specific to me in my mind that I thought was super clear. But when I told Emil and Patrick, of course, like they have a very different relationship to those words than I do. I mean, they can't read my mind. And so I think the three of us took the the prompt to make three-dimensional juggling in a very different way. And as I was working on the assignment yesterday, I don't think I necessarily could articulate what I meant before I saw Patrick. Like, I mean, now after the fact, I can reconstruct and say, oh, of course we should have, I meant like this, but not like that. But if you would have asked me beforehand, I couldn't have clarified any better than just like, hey, let's make some three-dimensional juggling. But when I saw Patrick do his thing, I started to realize at first, the construct of the moment was he was, I mean, we can ask him, he's right there, but the construct of the moment was that he was imagining 3D in terms of an external kind of viewpoint. And I meant more 3D in terms of a relationship to myself, in terms of the objects, because with juggling, we normally just throw stuff up and down, if I'm really simplistic here, because of the direction of gravity and because of our anatomy and the difficulty of technique. We rarely throw things away from us or towards us. Like, that's super bizarre, unless we're working with someone else. But to do it alone, it's a very unexplored juggling technique. And I thought, oh, that would be a worthwhile, moment to spend some time on that. But then I think Patrick was at first imagining it was more three-dimensional in terms of the visual effect around him, that he could do maybe more normal techniques, but with an eye towards how they looked on the outside, as opposed to an internal expression of the three-dimensionalness. And so it was funny that at one, like he was searching and searching with his turning around to give a viewpoint for everybody to look at him. But then at one point it started to click, and that's what you noticed, Joel. Because at one point it started to work. He was searching and it started to work from the technique, not from the external viewpoint, but from the technique itself started to create the turning. And what the moment you're talking about is that he was, flopping the club, the flopping on the shoulder, but then he caught it on his neck, but he kept turning. He followed the movement of the club. And the thing is, if you catch the club on your neck, you don't have to move. You can just stand there and not turn. But he was following the concept from inside the technique, which meant he kept turning so the club stopped, but it kept going. And that was the moment of technique for me where I go, you found it. Like, that is the concept. Where does that make any sense? I mean, I can.
Oh yeah, no, it makes fabulous sense. Yeah.
Right. So
no,
that was that moment where it was like the technique itself made him, the concept combined with what the technique he actually did made him actually do something in one way that wasn't necessary. Like, he could have just stood there, but he kept turning and following the momentum of that club. And that created the real expression of the 3D moment for me. And I think for you too. That's why it stuck out. I think it was really visually distinct. And there was a truth there in that moment. And then we can start to say, well, what is 3D juggling? I could cut that moment of video out and start to tell somebody, this is concretely 3D juggling. And we can start to analyze, well, okay, what was he doing then? And we could try to reconstruct it. But at least we have a captured moment of what the hell I was trying to say before I could say it. And that's what I thought was magical about that moment, that it gave a real, image to what the words could not give an image to before we saw it, right?
Yeah. And like with your show, I was even thinking about wanting to, get it into the future state of the sphere, wanting to put a bounty out on an archival fragment on that moment, because there's more to unpack there for me with that whole sense of follow the technique, in its creation, and especially with juggling, with for me, how it plays with perceived speed and perceived distance. What I'm doing right now is like stretching a huge rubber band, because I feel like a lot of the stuff that I see that I love, it's this incredible stretch there, or there's this getting something there before you get there, and how that creates a flow and a real movement that is super dynamic and exciting to be in. And I kind of want to take that kind of picture and kind of slowly meld it right now with some of the kind of social, financial flows. I want to think about Erik maybe being able to jump in a little bit as we transition. We're going to start talking about some of the fragments, or showing some of the fragments for contemplation that we made yesterday, and kind of considering them in light of some kind of prompts, or some things that get us into, it's not metaphorical, but I'm very interested in what actual performing arts unveil to us about ways that some of the really other dynamic systems in the world work. And one of those really dynamic systems is finance, actually, right? Is the way we can organize ourselves and those new systems. And so it wouldn't just be like a fun, kitschy, cute thing to like make a sphere financial system that felt like juggling, but rather, to go back to your technique point, but that if there's real intelligence that's unearthed by following the technique, that's transversal, or that connects across disciplines, is what transversal means. But I also just want to say, as we transition into that part, thank you so much, Jay. It's such a pleasure to think with you, create with you. Long may we reign.
Nice to talk to you,
Thanks.
man.
So, yeah, really appreciate it. Yeah. So that I just want to kind of try to and I know some of you weren't there for that moment yesterday, but I think all of you in your different ways, your different practices, understand what that means for a technique to lead rather than a predetermined scape, and what that means in terms of how prompts and how they kind of cast a lure for our action and our own future, and like mechanism design. Like I remember you also said, Jay, at a certain point, and this goes back to your symbol encoding thing. You make a hash of like you're like, oh, instead of having to go through the whole thing, I'll just say do that elbow thing,
Yeah.
So I don't know, Erik, if you're comfortable with me kind of like throwing a bit to you, in terms of some of this, like this sense of like following the technique and some of the technical, how we in the sphere we're not just making whatever we want. We are trying to take seriously the fact that there are real new systems in the world that we want to utilize, and in an artful way, so we can't just bring any of our wild dreams. There's actually something of the technicality of what we're doing that comes back on us, and that's a part of creating in the sphere and going forward. How's that for a lure? Do you like that?
Maybe before adding more speculation or more loops, I'd be very interested in hearing what other people here have to say, because Jay has shared so much.
I know,
so
it was
many
awesome.
fragments of process. I love the way, Jay, you proceeded by concrete examples that you deployed. Each example becomes a little paradigm that opens up a dimension of its own. And well, I'd be curious to hear a little bit more from other people, like what it resonates with, especially our partners that have direct direct practice with Circus, but also Lenny is there, Catherine, Gayatri. Yeah, just because there's like such a flow of speech, I'd be very happy if we can change rhythm a little bit and have other types of resonances before we jump into this big bounty of ours, thinking circus and finance, or finance,
Yeah,
as Bob Meister says, jointly,
yeah,
which I think is a whole different proposition altogether.
Yeah, well, that sounds great. Thanks. Yeah, I think I just wanted to mention that there is that connection, so maybe we can just earmark that, and then we'll save the viewing of the fragments for the afternoon after lunch.
I mean,
Yeah,
just to complement with, like, we're insisting a lot on fragments here at the Anarchive Labs, but the whole, when we bring in the question of economy or finance, it brings up the question of loops. Like an economy is something that loops itself into existence. It has to somehow have a return of investment or something. So it's just, I think, beautiful to think that now we're taking this whole process from the perspective of the fragment, and there is the question of how it loops itself into existence that becomes the system or the mechanism design, as you were pointing at.
yeah.
And fantastically speaking, I mean, juggling clearly has a sense of looping itself into existence. So it's pretty straightforward here, how you can think of circus and finance jointly. But yeah.
but yeah, I love that feeling though. It would be great to hear from from everyone. What's resonating? What do you feel that you want to cut through with or point to?
Hi, it's the
Hi.
Basque. It's the Basque country. um, Harking back to the conversation we had yesterday, we had many, but about how for me anarchival traces are first and foremost in the body. I was just struck that when Joel told the story about the books that the audience members were fabulating the new end each time, I started to cry. And I thought that was really interesting. I don't know why particularly, and it didn't feel like a memory. It just felt like joy maybe. But I just wanted to share that because it wasn't, I don't know how to draw a tear.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, maybe most endings feel like they're already written or something, you know? That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. How about others would love to?
On this, I
Love
would be
to.
actually really curious because Jay introduced that artist as someone who wouldn't like to see his work as a magic show. And I was actually really curious to hear how he would perceive his own work. I don't know if Jay hears this at the moment.
Yeah, I'm a juggler. I'm an artist, but without spending too much time politically, I just say I'm a juggler because I want to promote that. But I'm an artist who uses juggling as my main medium, if we get technical. But culturally, I'm a juggler, and I'm super happy with that. And I went through such a long process to be able to say that. I mean, not to myself.
You're going to cry now, I would say.
No, but just to externalize my work. I mean, I went through a long phase of saying I was a postmodern juggler, which is not a thing, that doesn't exist. But it just sounds like it's all, again, coming back to that thing of how do you externalize your work and to what goal. And a large part of my identity externally over the years has just been, financial concerns of like, got to market myself. Postmodern juggler sounds cool. Some places that might give me money, but some other places not. And so in the end, I just said, no, juggling is an art form on its own. And I honestly live and die by that. So politically, I'm a juggler, and, I get it that there's a whole mess of stuff that can come with that. But on the other hand, it's just very easy too. It's just a breath of fresh air. I'm a juggler. I'm super cool with that. Not everybody has to love juggling. That's super cool too. I don't mind, but I have no problem saying that. But with Derek Delgaudio, he doesn't want to be a magician because there is that stigma and the hierarchy of the arts in society right now. And we do have this self-esteem problem as artists being in the circus arts, where we are on one of the lower rungs of that hierarchy in terms of cultural status and validation. We have opera, music, we have sports, like mass entertainment, like, things like that. And then we have this, that's a whole other conversation about the lack of self-esteem in the circus arts, which really drives a lot of our actions unconsciously, I think. And it's a really, really big, big topic to dive into one day, but culturally, but yeah, I'm a juggler.
Thank you. Yeah, that was very interesting. I mean, I see this discussion definitely also in like many other different art forms, especially like dancers / contemporary art. There is this whole thing about people like thinking of what they're doing is dance, or whether it's performance art, or are they actually, like, some of them are actually trying to reclaim the word dance and particularly call themselves dancers, even though other people would say you're not dancing. Yeah, I find that quite an interesting discussion.
I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but just really fast, there was an online showcase of circus in Sweden a couple months ago, Subcase, and there was like 80 companies or something involved. And I read the description of every single company, including my own company. And there was only one company out of 80 companies that said the word circus in the description of what they do. And that was Ule's company. actually. And I just found that really shocking, and I was really upset with myself as well. But I understand. I mean, this is a whole other conversation. Clearly, there is an unconscious market force, perhaps, and there was also a curated collection. You had to apply to be in the showcase. So maybe the people who were curating or gatekeeping that selection, you had to speak a certain language of a certain style to get into that collection of people or companies. But I thought it was shocking that it was a circus festival and only one person out of 80 people said, I do circus. It just blew my mind, including me.
Yeah.
I was ashamed. I'm still ashamed. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
didn't-
Other folks. I'd love to hear.
Hi. So I would like to start by saying that this was a really inspiring moment this morning. I'm actually very sorry that I couldn't join you yesterday, and unfortunately I can't make it this afternoon and tomorrow. My schedule is completely crazy right now. But yeah, thank you for all of the sharing, because it's quite interesting for me to know this process. And I just got stuck with something that I think it was Jay that said. It's like you can steal my work, but you cannot steal my process. Because for me as an artist, the result is important, but the process is the thing that can change me as a person, as an artist. So that was actually the key thought for me for this morning. And it's quite interesting for us to keep this in mind, since we are talking about the Anarchive, because the process is the biggest part of the show. So I just want to say this, and thank you all.
Thank you, Claudia. That's amazing.
Thank you. I will try to make my mind. This was such a complex morning. This morning I was reading a book in Portuguese, and now I have a problem of translation, but I will try to translate. That was saying, and it resonates with what Jay was telling after. It was saying that creating the concept of in corpo, which is a non-body, or in body, a body, a non-body, I don't know how you say it, which is that part of the body which is constituted by relations. And the body would be constituted by the physical body, the flesh body, and the non-body, which are all the relationships, the positive and the negative effects that it has. And I feel that the work that we do, if I think of it as a body, it is a non-body because it creates relations with the audience. And then I was thinking about the process of giving to the audience a perspective of the work and what we create. And I really try to make this really complicated in my mind.
Oh, that's
it's
great.
very basic.
It's coming through amazing.
And somehow I was thinking of the archive, the Bible that Jay was telling, has something which is like my ownership of the work of art as an artist, which is just my flesh body, and this is what I want to maintain. And the Unarchive has something that is the non-body of the work, and there I see that the audience, or not the owners, not the authors of the work, have so much input. And I just start to see this collective of the Anarchive, the collective vision and inputs of the Anarchive. For me, this starts to be so strong. And then I was asking myself, so who makes the fragments? Is it the artist that has to make the fragments, or not? It was all
Beautiful.
Maybe the artist formerly known as the audience could be an answer to that.
Yeah, and the Jay said, you know, that you give something a name, then you can talk about it, you know, and even giving the name of the Anarchive, as long as we don't vault that up to a new shibboleth or a new shrine to, you know, to, then it at least gives us that thing to talk about, that non-body that is a real already happening collective, you know, of what is the conditions for creativity.
Yes, but it just was so strong then, the effects that the work has on the surroundings, on its surroundings, just became so strong for me that the Anarchive, for me, it should focus on these effects more than on the work of art.
Absolutely.
On the cry, on the tears, on the laughs, or the surroundings, maybe non-human effects, other kind of effects, and it just started to become very strong.
I totally agree, because and then you get it. I love that the way you say that, because then it pulls our attention away from this object-centered move. You know, it when we're making fragments about the atmosphere, that draws us into appreciation of all that as well.
Hello.
Hi, Gayatri.
Hi, everybody. This is, I don't know how to like tie everything up, but probably from the non-body. But a little bit more going back to what Jay was talking about, where he was kind of negotiating who he is in the, you know, professional space, or, you know, whether he was a juggler or an artist, and the hierarchy of a circus artist, and the questions, and these kind of questions that we ask and we want to negotiate. I was actually telling Erik yesterday that I find, I don't know if it's the sphere or if it's the Anarchive process, but there needs to, like I have to also, on top of understanding what I am, or like, you know, what kind of artist or whatever, I also have this other layer that I'm from India, right? And because of a certain globalization process that's happened over the last 30 years, with this, you know, one-way traffic from the West to India, we're always negotiating what cultural science, cultural appropriations, you know, that we put out and what is there. But I feel like there needs to be some kind of international commons, you know, where we can negotiate this and debate these kind of symbols, or like identities, or these politics. And I feel like, you know, well, this would be a nice space to have those commons, to do that. You know, otherwise we're just we're getting swayed by the hierarchies, you know, and where we are slotted in that sense. I don't know how to.
Yeah. So all right. What I hear you saying, and tell me what you think of it, that you're saying, like, you, from your experience, like the anarchival practices could make a split between these kind of identitarian symbolic things, and allow us to kind of play more with like the partials and the effects without settling down quite yet, so we can actually have so that there
Yes.
can be debates about it. Is that?
Yes, exactly, because there has to be that debate. There's no
Wow.
space for that debate. There's no space for those negotiations. I mean, that's why Jay was like, oh, I was so happy to see one person say there's a circus, you know? And yeah, it's sort of like, well, again, I spoke to Erik yesterday. It's the same thing as the right to opacity, right? You know, how do you have that space? And the Anarchive, besides anarchiving as a process, has to also, you know, make the space for that debate, I guess, or negotiations, you know, with these cultural symbols and signs and hierarchies and blah blah blah. Because I will always be a diversity option, you know.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
Maybe
yeah.
I can jump in here on what you point as comments and from the perspective that you're doing it, like starting with Jay's political claim as a juggler, you know. So if we take it like from the bottom up, why is that claim necessary and why is it political? It's because there is a world that is embedded in that junction of circus and juggling, you know, and that world needs to be able to speak for itself in its own terms. So what I hear in your call for a negotiation or like a space for negotiating practices, it sounds cosmopolitical in the sense that instead of having a pseudo space of pre-clarified where if you're good enough at defining what you're doing, then everyone universally will understand it and we will be able to just compute all of the different practices. But it doesn't happen this way. Like there is a political game of claims because each claim has a texture and a quality of its own that needs to be able or given the possibility to express itself in its own terms. And that's the it's the cosmo in cosmopolitical. And I'm really glad to hear that the Anarchive questioning and process triggers that type of concern for you, because that means that something is working in the sense of creating a bit of freedom and a space of play where we're not constantly trying to define what we're doing, but actually, like it was beautifully said before, like following the technique, like the process in itself without pretending that whatever happens, we know already, or we know already where it's going. So like opening up the space of not knowing as a value in itself. There I can build up some financial tricks or loops in that time interval that we're opening up together, because I really think that's where the value resides at the end of the day. And that's not to oppose process against product. Quite the contrary. Like I really like how Teresa, you also said, like when the work is alive, it has an impact. It exceeds itself and it starts generating a public of its own. And we go through time with that. Like it's like we're creating a vessel for ourselves in which we can exist in our own terms. And I love, Gayatri, that you're bringing that international dimension to it, because that really matters.
No, I mean, that is very, it should be there, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I mean, it has to be there for it. Otherwise, it falls back into replicating the same thing, but it's just a different form, you know. And talking about replicating, I think that's also why I liked when Teresa brought up the the non-body, you know, and what that is in like relations, you know. I find that a sort of a protection of this kind of the vibe of the tribe. I don't know, you know. Yeah, and
Yeah, you can kind of like the Anarchive again, like helpfully names a kind of already gathered collective in which you're not, you can shield from kind of the exposure of being a modern individual, and either already pre-being that or already pre-not being that, right? And yeah, I love also the Gayatri, the thing when you're saying, relate it back to the comment about the archive and the Bible, how it's connected to political power, to who's at the top of the hierarchy, and so then the Anarchive should should naturally, but also should intentionally be about being in a more distributed fashion. The value of the multi-perspectivism that will always unsettle any kind of expected scene of what it means to be together in that sense. What? Yeah, that's a fabulous.
exactly.
Wow, there's.
Yeah.
I'm so many amazing reflections and fragments from that. So we're gonna take an hour break for lunch or for whatever kind of sustenance. you need. I'm just going to sit here and look at the Basque Country. No, Catherine, you don't have to keep your camera on. It's a and then we'll be back at 1 p.m. Sweden, Berlin time. Going to look through some of our fragments and do some floor work and some more anarchiving together. Thanks so much, everybody. See you in an hour.